So I've been playing a lot of the Pan-Asian cruisers, and I'm actually completely through the Chumphon here. And I wanted to give you my experience with this ship. I'll spoil it a little bit. It wasn't amazing. I really had a tough time with this ship. But before we get into the big issues, let's start off with some situations where this ship actually worked out quite well. Having a smoke in these close range battles is incredibly clutch. Here we are able to go dark and essentially farm out a nice now from 6 kilometers. This is something that the Atlanta just couldn't do. And of course a Flint with its smoke could also do as well. So it's not like it's the only tier 7 version of the Atlanta that has a smoke like this. And I do think the ship overall is much worse than both the Atlanta and the Flint. But of course, it's not a premium. It's not something you have to pay or grind a ton of in-game currency for. It's a tech tree ship. And I really do think Wargaming was trying to avoid a Smolensk situation, or a situation where they released an entire line of Smolensks and everyone got very frustrated by them. If that were the case, I think that Gneisenau would be the norm, and that was really not the norm, where we light 3 fires instantly after he damage cons our torpedo flood. Got very lucky there, for sure. The lack of DPM certainly does hurt this ship, but not in this case. We do get very lucky and manage to take out the Gneisenau. But you can just imagine how having a smoke plus this HE spam can be incredibly frustrating to deal with. And combined with the deep water torpedoes, especially as we get into the higher tier ones, they essentially want to just spin around in circles, popping their deep water torpedoes and their reload booster on the torps. The amount of torpedoes that you can launch in the higher tier ones is kind of absurd. It's a really, really rough line to deal with when pushing in. These are very strong ships when people push into you, and they're incredibly weak when people run away from you or just play at reasonable ranges. You're going to notice that this ship, and for that matter, most of the ships in this line, don't have a lot of range, and I found that to be very tricky to deal with, especially in the higher tier matches. Here, against our own tier, I didn't actually mind too much. The Chumphon actually performed really well against tier 7s. Even up to tier 8s, it did all right. It's those pesky tier 9 games that tend to happen a lot in these tier 7 ships these days that were really, really, really tough to deal with. But in this one, we've actually managed to get up to 90,000 damage already, which is pretty good considering our reload is around a second to a second and a half off of an Atlanta or Flint reload. That's brutal when you're relying on your DPM as a light cruiser like this. So the DPM I did find quite lacking, and since I have played a lot of Atlanta games in my time of playing this game, I immediately noticed the difference in the sound and feel of this ship. The sound of just shooting felt really slow. It felt like it was just missing something, and it definitely is. The DPM feels quite low. And in fact, there were situations where I was getting outgunned by destroyers. There were definitely situations where DDs have been outgunning me, primarily higher tier French DDs, that kind of thing, where it was tougher to hit them. But still, it kind of sucks to be outgunned by a destroyer when you're in a light cruiser. But at the same time, I will say I'm very glad these ships aren't a bunch of Smolensks. I am very, very happy about that for someone who likes to play other ships other than these ships. But I will say it does make this line a little bit tough. You'll also notice no hydro. So we're being hydroed right now by that Leander, and we have no recourse to spot him. I'm very reliant on my team. This ship and this line is incredibly team reliant for any sort of spotting. And it's pretty good in these situations. I will admit I got some pretty decent times in these close range engagements. I did all right in this one, managing to actually survive and take out quite a few ships as well. Unfortunately, I end up going on to lose this one, and it comes down to the carrier just striking me over and over again. I'm not going to show that, but just know the AA is really pretty bad on this ship. The AA rework really hurt the Atlanta class of ships since they relied so heavily on that long-range DPS and the defensive fire that went along with that. It really got crushed by converting that DPS of the long range into flak that is very easily avoided. Now that was probably my best scenario that I managed to survive, and that's why I wanted to start with that one, because it does show the massive strength of this ship, even in these close quarters engagements where a light cruiser, weakly armored, that doesn't have a lot of DPM might struggle. It does pretty good in those situations against its own tier. And here, I wanted to show my best game I had. We do a ton of damage in this game, and it really comes down to playing the middle of the map and using our torpedoes, our smoke screens, and our HE to pressure anyone who tries to come close to the middle of the map. And in Epicenter, it seems to work pretty well, especially on this map, assuming we're not getting flanked. I had a few times where I got Northern Waters Epicenter, probably my least favorite game mode and map combination possible. But I went for the middle and died very quickly as a result. So it's not as viable into those tier 9 games to play this close. But at least against lower tiers and the same tiers, it works out reasonably well. This ship is very much this playstyle though. Find an island, camp on that island, pop a smoke screen, rely on your team to spot for you, and just farm away. And that can be a little bit boring. I'll admit, I didn't find this the most engaging experience ever. It felt a little bit lame, but that's because I don't think this whole smoked up HE spam playstyle is for me. I know there's a lot of people or some other people who enjoy this kind of thing, and I think this line will be okay. The overall consensus I've seen though, at least when I've been streaming these games, is that they're not the best line in the game. And again, I do think that's a good thing, as a ton of tech tree Smolensks at every tier would have been awful to play against. So having poor arcs, poor range, a little bit less DPM, not as good fire chance, that kind of thing, does help, I think, the health of the meta at each tier. In this game, though, you can definitely see how long it takes to farm up damage. I've been skipping out some of the portions of this game that get a little bit boring, but you'll notice it's like 2,000 to 3,000 damage a salvo. We're definitely hoping for fires here, and just not really getting them. So 6.5 second reload for 2,000 to 3,000 damage per salvo. That takes a while for that damage to line up. And eventually, later on in the game, I did manage to farm my way up to 120,000. It did come from torpedoes a little bit and getting very lucky with fires. But it's just more of the same, just farming with the HE. I think that we all know how to do that by now from inside a smokescreen. You'll notice hitting destroyers also is very, very tough. I do think this is why I found myself getting outgunned, is that I'm just not great with these guns. They take such a long amount of lead to hit anything that goes over 40 knots. So hitting this this Minsk, the tech tree version of the Leningrad, is very difficult. And you'll notice that we actually got a torpedo on the Bayern behind us and managed to take him out. These long-range torpedoes that are deep waters are very good. They hit pretty hard, and there's really no reaction time to deep water torpedoes, so they do pretty solid. But relying on them for damage is tough, since as a cruiser, you can't get as close to the enemy team as a destroyer might be able to. So launching from farther away tends to lead to less accuracy. Up to 140,000 damage, 3 kills, and we take one last Hail Mary shot at a Leningrad, or the Minsk, and I actually managed to hit him. But look at how long it took for that salvo to land. It's more about the Minsk there not actually maneuvering to dodge that salvo. It was in the air so long. Unfortunately, this game does also end up in a loss. I found myself often having low battle impact. It really relied on doing damage. The damage output is the battle impact of this line, or at least this Chumphon here at tier 7. It's much like the French cruiser line, where there's no radar utility, hydro utility, it's just damage output. And unlike those French cruisers, this is close range damage output. So you're really reliant on getting maps like this with islands and teammates that will spot for you. That's very crucial, having teammates that'll spot for you. As you can see, I'm actually getting rushed by an Atlanta and a destroyer who is spotting, sorry, not spotting, but torping at me. But this is an Atlanta in front of me that's going to kill me, and I just never see him. You'll notice my team was quite spread out in that one. That tends to happen quite a lot. So in these tier 9 games then, it's really, really a massive problem to be playing a ship like this. You'll notice it's 5 minutes left in this entire game, and I had less than 30,000 damage when this clip started. That's how rough it is. It's an aggressive ship that requires you to get incredibly close into the enemy ships relative to the tier. At tier 9, 13 kilometers of range is basically brawling close range engagements already. It's rough. And of course, with a light cruiser, you're liable to getting overmatched and citadeled through the stern. It's a really, really rough time. And since I found myself playing against tier 9 a lot, probably more than 50% of my games were against tier 9, they often looked like this, where I had very little damage going into the late game, and the game was essentially over by the time I started getting damage, when the enemy team, who had basically cleaned up my team, started to push, and I got a little bit of damage out because of that. But it really felt bad to play, since I had to be so aggressive. I had to push in so hard just to even get in range of using these guns. And even then, it's quite difficult to use these guns at 13 kilometers, since they tend to hang up in the air so much. So here, another rough position. You'll notice there's a lot of close range engagements, and most of them turned out like this one, where I can find a destroyer at close range and potentially take him out, but as soon as there's a battleship or another cruiser around, I am in trouble. The smokescreen can help get me out of these bad situations, but even then, having a 9.1-ish kilometer detection is decent for tier 7, but it's not enough to deal with the destroyers potentially spotting me, and then the long-range HE or AP coming in hurts a lot. There's not very good armor here, the HP pool is small, the DPM is lacking, it's a really tough ship to play. And I gotta be honest, I didn't really enjoy playing the Chumphon, and from hearing from a few people who watch my streams, some of them even said this is the best in the line. So I'm on the Harbin now as far as grinding and getting through this line, and I'm sure I'll have a Harbin experience video out soon once I'm through that ship. But just know the tier 7 was a little bit rough, especially if you get into those tier 9 games. It might go a little better if you decide to div with a friendly destroyer who could smoke you up, spot for you, that kind of thing. I definitely recommend that if you have a friend to play with, because this thing solo was a rough time. You can see how awful it is being forced into these close range engagements when people tend to play at the back of the map. And that's the challenge. This ship is so bad into those long-range, campy, high-tier games, but at the same time, we're going to farm this Pommern for basically his whole HP pool. It's a very feast or famine ship. There is no in-between here. Either you're getting gifted free damage, like given to you on a silver platter. This Pommern is going to die here. I don't know why he's pushing. Most people aren't going to push in like this and give you all this damage, but it is nice. It's very, very good in this position, and I have to assume the rest of the line is going to be like this. The deep water torpedoes, like, there's no reaction time to them. They do a lot of damage, and the HE pressure is enough to light a lot of fires, which are going to tick for a ton of damage on these high-tier battleships. Most of my best games were the result of me being in a relatively aggressive position, using an island and some smoke to help me stay alive in those very aggressive island positions like this, and enemy battleships just walk into my range and gift themselves for free. That is the best games that I had, and when the battleships didn't just push in and give me damage for free, I often had very underwhelming performances where I had less than 30,000 damage, say, in the last 5 minutes of a game that was already over. This is a tough ship to play and do consistently well in. There will be times when you get a lot of damage, like I am doing here. It's really, really strong in these situations where people push into you, but I got a feeling that's not gonna last for very long. Unfortunately, I do think this ship is tough to play. It's good against its same tier, but Anything higher than that, it becomes a real challenge to impact the game and try and win some matches to grind through it. Of course, there's a massive, massive bonus for winning games as you're playing through these ships. The Harbin, of course, is what I'm on right now. As you can see, I'm partway through. But the commander is the same. I just copied him over. This is what I was running on the Chumphon as I was going through. Concealment is a must, in my opinion. I think you could get away without Superintendent for now. In the higher tiers, once you get a heal, that's going to be very valuable. Having Survivability Expert is huge on a ship with such low HP. Adrenaline Rush, of course, is also very nice. I think I messed up on my build, though, when I took Fill the Tubes instead of running Heavy HE and Sap. Since the caliber is so low, it's just a free 10% damage buff. So don't do what I did. I just am low on Elite Commander XP, as you can see, so I'm not resetting it quite yet. But definitely run HE, Heavy HE. I think it'd be just a straight 10% damage bonus to a ship that's really lacking in DPM. Going over the equipment, you don't get a concealment system, of course, on the Tier 7 yet, but this is what I was running on the Tier 7, the Chumphon there. Propulsion mod, I think, is a must for a ship that is in smoke so much, and especially one that doesn't have a hydro to deal with those incoming torps, or at least have some pre-warning of them. Aiming systems mod, I'm trying to hit as many of the shells on target as I can, and especially this Harbin, actually, I'm finding that it has some pretty poor dispersion. Chumphon was at least pretty decent in that regard, and really none of the other upgrades really appeal to me other than getting a little more damage on target. Engine room protection, very useful. Since there's such little armor, a lot of the HE shells are very capable of taking out the engine or the rudder. And of course, main armaments, because again, these turrets are pretty squishy. So that's been my experience in the Chumphon. Let me know how it's gone for you. Maybe I missed something in the playstyle of it that might unlock its full potential, but for me, this ship was a real chore to get through. It was an incredibly difficult, frustrating experience, mainly due to those Tier 9 matches and the game overall tending to play outside of 13 kilometers. I'd say outside 15 kilometers is normal engagement range these days, and this ship just can't even reach those distances. So that's why I think it's a rough experience, and definitely try to div up to get through this one. Once I make it to the Tier 10, I'll give a whole line review if it's even worth grinding through them, but for now, it's not looking so good. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.